Yeah, I know.
Oh, cool. So Menti.com. I pulled it up. This is cool. Create your own Mentimeter.
Yeah, it works. It works pretty well. I did it a lot during like Zoom times, like, or during when we were like fully remote, just to give people a break from looking at my face on the screen.
And for folks who are joining us, we'll start in just a couple of minutes, allow people to kind of keep joining just after the hour, but around 6:02, we'll get started. Thanks for your patience and thank you for being here. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Some other folks might join, but hi everyone, welcome. My name is Emily Lalonde. I'm the Assistant Director of Career Education at the AU Career Center. And today I'll mostly be in the background, but I wanted to give some ground rules before I turn it over to Katie and Felicia for their wonderful presentation this evening. So as I mentioned, I'll be on the session kind of monitoring the chat and the Q&A. I will also be sharing resources in the chat. And so keep an eye out for those and make sure to click once to download and then a second time to open them. But if you have any questions about those, just let me know and I can repost them. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel early next week. So thank you again for being here on this beautiful day. I will turn it over now to Felicia and Katie to kick it off. Thank you both.
Felicia, did you want me to go ahead and get started? Great. Okay, I will. Thank you. Thanks so much, Emily. And welcome, everyone. Yes, I want to thank you as well for joining us on a beautiful day. I am sure it was hard to tear yourself away from various outdoor activities. I'm Katie Hutt, and I am the business librarian. So I work with the students and also faculty and staff in Kogod primarily to help with all of their research needs. As part of that role, I'm also the library liaison to the Career Center. And so Emily had asked if I could join this presentation to talk about the research side of interview prep. So Felicia is going to take you through some great resources on preparing yourself for the interview, the kinds of questions, stuff like that. What I'm going to talk about today are the resources that you have access to here at AU that will help you with getting ready for your interviews. So to start, I thought we could do just a quick poll just to kind of see where everyone is, asking you what tools you currently use for interview prep. And that could be, I don't use tools, I just use Google, or anything else. Just kind of want to see where everyone is. And we'll take a look at the results. And I see Emily has put the link and the code in the chat too. It's on the slide, but she's also putting it in the chat. Thank you, Emily. So I see some great answers here. This is really helpful. Big interview, which I'm actually not familiar with. Google, LinkedIn, online question list. Those are all really great resources. What I'm going to show you today, more LinkedIn. Oh, wait, there's something else here. Of the organization's website, doing a mock interview. Yeah, these are all great. What I'm going to show you today are subscription-based resources that the library provides access to that you can use as AU students. You have full access to everything. I'll just give everyone another minute or two if you think of anything else that you want to put in the poll. All right, so I see this is slowing down, so I'm going to go back to our slides. I'm actually, Felicia, if you want to share the slide again, your slides again. Perfect, and we can go to the next slide. So just talking about research, when you're doing research for an interview, you can think of it as though you're doing research for any kind of assignment that you're doing right now at AU, where maybe you are starting from the library, maybe you're not. I know people have their preferences, but again, we are going to be looking just quickly at some library resources before Felicia takes over. And you can use these library tools to become very, very knowledgeable about the company that you're interviewing with and the industry that company is a part of as a whole. So great, thank you, Felicia. So we're going to be looking at this subject guide, which is called Using Library Resources for Career Research. The URL is here, and Emily's also going to put it in the chat, and I will just wait a minute. If people want to put that URL in, I'm just going to wait a minute until I start to navigate to the subject guide. So this is also linked. We're going to be sending out the slides after this. This is also linked here, so you can link directly to it. And now I am going to go navigate to the subject guide as well. So I'm going to start off here in the library homepage. That URL, if you want to follow along with what I'm doing, if you haven't already entered the URL for the subject guide, is american.edu/library. And then I'm going to go under this research assistance column, and I'm going to select subject guides. So I don't know if we have any co-guide students on the call today. If there are any, you probably have met me before, and you may know about my love for subject guides. So I like to put resources in subject guides. I just think it's a handy way to collect links to disparate resources that are all kind of on the same subject. It's the name subject guides. So what I'm going to do here is actually do a search for career. I think it's under career. Let's just try career. And I see this subject guide, Using Library Resources for Career Research. So we're going to jump into some of these now. We're going to start off under this tab here, which is Company, Organization, and People Research. So I have a number of different company and organization research and people research tools here. We're going to look at a few of them. We're not going to look at all of them just for timing's sake. The first one I wanted to take a look at is Hoovers. So Hoovers is a great resource if you're trying to do research on a company, like a big public company. So let's say you're interviewing for Meta. Hoovers is going to be your go-to source for insider information on the company. So I have sort of walked you through how to access it and how to search it here in this guide, and I'm going to do that now as well. So I'm going to select the link here. And I'm already authenticated, but you may need to enter in your regular AU credentials to access it. And then I'm going to search at the top here for Meta. And when I do that, I see some options filling in this drop-down menu here. I can go ahead and select Meta platforms. And so you'll see that this does provide information above and beyond what you'd find in, say, LinkedIn. Most of this information, since Meta is a public company, is probably available through Google, but you would have to go through several different searches in Google, several different sites in Google in order to find it all in one place. And Hoovers has it just all right here for us. So we see this company description here, a description of the business, and we can read more, we can expand this. And then if we go over to this side view, there's a navigation panel here on the side, and we can use this to kind of get around. So we can also look at site contacts, so the employees at Meta, so you could even look up the person that you're interviewing with. You can also do that on LinkedIn, of course, but you can get that information here. We have the corporate family, so this will show all the private subsidiaries owned by Meta, which can be helpful just to kind of get a sense of like how it's organized, right? So we can see Instagram, we see WhatsApp, etc. We can look at a SWOT analysis. So that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that will give you a really good sense of sort of what the company is facing, right? What's going well, what's maybe not going so well, what do they need to worry about? Where can you come in and say, I'm your person for this. I'm gonna save you from the threat of stringent regulations, let's say, for example. And then we also have links to latest news coverage. And again, these are from newspapers that you can probably access on your own, but they're all here, and we can see that they're all about the company Meta. And then we have some advanced information, so competitors, that may be good to know about, peers, the annual reports and the SEC filings if you want to get a sense of the financial situation of the company, the technologies they use, and then we also have these financials here as well. So lots of information that we can get through Hoovers, but again, this is best used for public companies. If, for example, you're interviewing for a smaller startup company, maybe a private company that is not yet public, Hoovers is going to be a little bit harder to use. If that's the case, if you are interviewing for, again, a startup, especially in emerging tech, one of the tools I like the best is called PitchBook. So PitchBook is a tool that tracks private markets. And what I mean by that is private equity, hedge funds, venture capital. Where are they investing their money? They often invest their money in emerging tech in these small startup companies, right? And so by looking at where the money is going, that's sort of why it came about, to track where the money is going, but then they also started to track these companies too. So this, when I clicked on the link in my subject guide, it brings me to these instructions on how to register for an account. You do need to register for an account, but we can just take a quick look here at PitchBook. And we could do a search, let's say, for OpenAI. Right, so this is a company that that has ChatGPT. So a lot of interest in this company. But we can see here, right, this timeline of funding, which could be helpful. So where are they in the funding process? And then we have this general information here, the industry that it's part of, similar companies, again, the financials. That can be hard to come across, especially for a private company, right? Because private companies do not have to disclose their financials to the SEC, as opposed to a public company, which does. So financials can be hard to find, but if you want to get a financial picture of the company you're interviewing for, and it's a private company, PitchBook does have this information, as well as the team, the board members, and the deal history. So lots of stuff in PitchBook. So we just looked at a tool for big sort of public company research and for smaller startup company research. But what if you're interviewing for a job with the government, right? This is AU, and there's obviously a lot of interest in that among our students. So my favorite resource for doing government research is Leadership Connect, which you may be familiar with already. But I've linked to it here in this guide with, again, instructions on how to search, kind of just quick high-level instructions on what to do. And we can search here by agency. So if you're interviewing for either an agency, or we can search by person. Leadership Connect is really robust. So let's say you're interviewing with the Environmental Protection Agency. We can search for that here. Oops. Or let's try EPA. And then we see some options autofilling in this drop-down menu. So I selected EPA, and then I see a couple things up here. I have these two icons here. I can print this page. I can also open the org chart. So this can be really, really helpful, I think, especially for agency roles, because you want to see sort of who's reporting to who, where is that person that you're interviewing with fit in on the org chart, right? So there's a lot of information here. And we can go back and look at the sort of EPA landing page again. They've linked their strategic plan. So if you want to take a look at the EPA strategic plan before you interview with them and see what they have on the horizon, I think that can be really helpful. Again, the news, they've aggregated news on EPA, they've aggregated their tweets. You can see this was from today, so it's very, very current. And then we have a list of roles within the EPA by job focus. So if we want to, look at, let's say, climate, you're interviewing with a climate change department within the EPA. We can try to filter. Oh, that's not right. That doesn't want to work for me. Doesn't want to work for me right now, but we can scroll through and see everyone at the EPA, and you can look for your contact there and learn more information about them. So let's say you're interviewing with Jahi A. Wise, and we want to know more about this person. Here we have where they went to school, their career history. So you can really, really learn a lot about the people that you're interviewing with and the agencies that you're interviewing for in Leadership Connect. And then finally, if you're interviewing, let's say for a nonprofit, my favorite resource is GuideStar. So this is up at the top, and this is our database for nonprofit company information. So if we do a search here for, let's say, organization, communities in school, we can search here. And Communities in School is an organization that has many chapters throughout, in multiple states and throughout the country. So let's say we're interviewing at Communities in School in DC. We could enter in our city here. On the side, and then we can search that way. Oh, and it says 0. I just found this yesterday. Let's see if I can do this again. Let's try by state. Let's try that. There we go. And that gets me to the CIS in the nation's capital. So the chapter in DC, where I can learn more about the organization. It wants me to sign up for free. You do need to create an account, which I've already done, but it doesn't remember that right now. But GuideStar is a great resource for all nonprofit research. I just want to quickly talk about some industry research. So again, any CoGuide students here would probably be familiar with IBISWorld, but IBISWorld is a great tool for any US-based industries. It's very easy to use, and it provides really, really comprehensive information on given industries. So let's say we were looking at the vocation, we're interviewing for a training school. So we can look at trade and technical schools in the US, for example. Could also look at higher ed, something like that. And then we have this whole report on the industry. I can download the report. I can see that it's 37 pages, so it's really going to be a very comprehensive overview. And I think it's a great idea to try to do more research about the industry that the company you're interviewing is part of, so you really get a sense of what's been going on in the industry, what have the challenges been, what does the future look like. You'll get a really holistic, comprehensive view of the industry by using some of these tools. So again, that was pretty quick. It was a little actually longer than I wanted to go, but just a sample of the tools that you can find through the library. Again, I've compiled them all in this subject guide. So if you're doing research on your company or on the industry before your interview, I would encourage you to check some of these out. And that's all I have. So yeah, I'm turning it over to Felicia now.
That was amazing, Katie. Every time I talk to you, I learn so much. So I appreciate the walkthrough. So now that Katie has given us lots of details about research, and hopefully you've saved some of the links that Emily has in the chat. If not, you'll definitely get the information early next week. We'll go into the interview. So a little bit more about me. I am part of the Career Center, and I work specifically with those who have a major or minor in the School of Communication. And so a lot of times when I meet with clients, they're constantly saying, I'm nervous about the interview. I don't know what they're going to ask. I don't know how to prepare. I'm terrified. How do you help me with this process? And so one of the things we want to make sure is that there's a common misconception that the interview is a one-sided process. You know, it's not just the employer deciding if you want to be hired. And yes, the employer is looking at your ability to add value, but it's also for you as who we'll call the candidate to determine if the employer's organization is where you want to go and spend most of your working day and how it impacts your personal life factors. And that could be everything from salary to vacation to benefits, you know, hybrid or working remote opportunities, a variety on the job. So those things would be definitely important for you. We're going to go over to these different styles. And I would love your participation in this. If you could please raise your virtual hand, you'll see it under, oh gosh, okay, my screen looks a little different, sorry. You can raise your virtual hand if you've ever experienced any of the interviews on the actually on the right, like in person, phone, Skype, Zoom, Super Saturday. If you're not familiar with it, you could just kind of let me know by raising your hand. Okay. So I'll go a little bit to the left side, and we'll talk a little bit more about interview formats, whether they're open-ended questions that say things like, tell me about yourself. There are oftentimes, I know in my interview, when I came to the Career Center, I had to give a presentation about a subject they gave me as part of my interview. And we'll talk about what a structured behavioral group and also about what brain teasers are. And you'll be prepared for all these things based on the resources that Katie has already provided for you, and also working with your career advisor and thinking about a strategy. So that's going to be important. So let's move ahead to the interview format. These are some of those open-ended questions that I mentioned. And by structured, I mean there's an actual time that the employer has said, you and I will chat as a candidate about what you bring to the table. So one of the things that's really helpful for you is have your resume available at the interview. Not only can you give another copy to the person you're meeting with, you might want to glance down for a second as you talk a little bit about yourself in case you're getting nervous. Don't stare at it and read it like a speech, but you definitely want to take a glance at it because you're nervous. And if you're reviewing your resume beforehand and making sure it looks great, you're more familiar with it and you're able to answer questions. So things like, are you willing to work remotely? Way more people are saying yes, but they may ask a little bit more questions as far as what is your setup at home, as far as your Wi-Fi, and are you able to use a business phone or a personal phone? Even everything's like, just our lighting, so we can have good lighting when we're chatting with people virtually. How many of you have ever heard of behavioral interviewing? Okay. So the behavior interview is typically one-on-one, or it could be with multiple people. And it's the candidates having the same questions typically, so that the hiring decision is easier to make on each person. So there are different behavioral categories, and we'll talk about how you identify what those could be in the job description. So maybe they're focusing on conflict resolution, time management, your organizational skills, your leadership skills, maybe even multitasking. So I wanted to definitely highlight this because behavioral questions are pretty lengthy. And a sample question would be, tell me about a time you worked with a difficult person or difficult circumstance. What was the result? Now, while your heart is beating fast and your mind is going through, oh, this is a really long question, how do I respond to it? The best way to respond to it is what we call using the STAR technique. So this gives you an opportunity to incorporate your transferable skills within your story. So there's no right or wrong way to answer a question, but if you start off with describing the situation of I worked on a team project, we had a group of 4 people in it. We would schedule our meetings. We notoriously had someone for our task that had challenges with their work schedule and also with their class schedule. You could walk through the action steps of why you used WhatsApp or some other tools to make sure everyone was kept abreast as to the status. As a result, you had a favorable presentation. You received a grade of A. You can kind of give them the story. And that was just really generic, but you want to be as specific as possible about the story, because the whole goal with behavioral interviewing is that employer is looking for a way to demonstrate you have leadership skills or the ability to work in a difficult circumstance. So they want to check off that you've given evidence of that, or they want to check off that you haven't given evidence of that. And that helps them compare apples with oranges. Maybe they talk to other candidates and all they have to do is think about, did they give evidence of working in a difficult circumstance, or would they be flexible to learn in this environment based on how they responded? So here comes sometimes the most scariest interview setting for most people, and it's the panel. You could be speaking with multiple people in one room, or you could be speaking with people back to back. They put you into an interview room and they come in, the next person introduces themselves. Sometimes this is part of seeing if you fit into the cultural fit of the office, and everybody gives their feedback. Our Career Center has done this throughout our entire process. We use panel interviews from whether you work at the front desk to whether you work with our merit awards to whether you work as a career advisor. And that way it makes it a lot easier to get feedback from everybody that's in the room when the candidate has left for the day, and say, how would they fit into our cultural fit? And would they be a great resource within our office? So you may see this quite often. If it's on Zoom or Skype, and we'll talk about that pretty soon, then you'll see multiple faces kind of floating around, and you need to practice that eye contact with multiple faces, even if it's just like a nice little nod. A lot of times with my previous company where I worked for an accounting firm, we always had the one bad guy in the corner who didn't ask questions but just kind of stared, and so it was taking notes. And they did that intentionally to see if you could feel that pressure of working with a client who's deciding whether or not they want to shell out how much money for your services. So you still have to make contact with the guilty guy in the corner, the bad guy in the corner. Now, this is not as common if you're not in the business or consulting field, but sometimes you get these brain teasers. So maybe some of you all have heard, how many McDonald's French fries were eaten in the United States in the past year, or how many golf balls fit into a 747. There is no right answer, but this is the one opportunity where you talk out loud about how you're getting that answer. You could say something where I make it up and I go, oh, a golf ball is about 3 inches in diameter. I don't know if that's correct, but I'm going to walk through it. I imagine that at least 100 could fit per seat. There's 3 seats per side of the plane, maybe 6 going across. A 747 has 50 rows. Again, just kind of making it up, but you're showing somebody you thought through it. You can even actually use note paper a lot of times. So if you come across that, that's kind of what they're looking for. Sometimes companies will have a more extensive what we call a case interview instead of just a brain teaser. And you may actually have to solve something during that Super Saturday event where maybe 3 or 4 people you're not familiar with get a case. COGOT does these great case competitions. So if you really want experience doing that, you can join and you don't have to be a COGOT major. So you really get to understand as to how do you evaluate the case, how you do research, how you're working together as a team. And it's a great resume builder. So you can talk about that experience. Those are those great transferable skills. So I mentioned earlier that we would talk about like, how do I figure out the interview questions, Felicia? I have no idea what they could possibly ask me in this interview setting. And there's, again, some additional resources. Handshake is where most of you all registered for this event this evening. It's the same tool where you can look up the job description. If they have what I call a hearty job description, you can see the qualifications for the job. You can see the duties and responsibilities. If you have that light bulb moment and go, hey, I do have a degree in PR, or my preferred qualifications, I am really solid with my writing and my proofreading, then think through how you would respond to a question that demonstrates your writing skills. Okay, that would be great. Katie also shows you those additional resources. See what that company does if they don't have a hearty job description, and then you can see what possible questions you could pull up. Here's an example that I'll pull up about an actual job description. And this is just because I'm an SOC advisor. I pulled up one from Journalism Jobs, and I highlighted in here what we call keywords. They could be industry words, they could be brand words, whatever way you want to describe them. So going into this interview with the Capitol Hill Reporter, I may want to talk about one I researched, wrote, reported on stories. If I'm using things on certain websites, my ability to print electronic publications, so there might be some technologies involved. If I've ever covered stories about Capitol Hill, if I put together press kits, those examples are ways you can kind of pull out the keywords, not just for the interview, but also in your resume to make sure you are the candidate they select. So let's pause for a second because there's a lot of information I just shared about the types of interviews. And a lot of these will be in handouts that Emily will share. So there's a behavior interviewing handout. There's also a case interviewing handout. There's quite a bit in this one packet that we can send to you in one big packet next week with the link, but we also can share individually here in the chat. So I want to go back and reflect on the fact that we have different types of interviews, and ones that people may not be as familiar with or are pretty green, which is why I made the screen green, is artificial intelligence or AI. So we'll talk about that last. The first one we'll go into is the phone interview. It seems like during the pandemic, it kind of died. But as a former recruiter, I constantly called people on the phone because their phone number was on their resume. Most of the time it was impromptu. I thought, oh, it might be dinner time. Let me call them because they applied for this position. They typically were in shock. So I like to alert anyone who's in the process of applying. Once you submit it, you are always in candidate mode. So your voicemail should be appropriate. If you are in a space where you can't answer the phone, guess what? Don't answer it. You can hear the voicemail, go to a quiet place, maybe a place where you have better signal and Wi-Fi. You can always call the person back and say, hey, I'd like to schedule a time where we can chat. And usually a big thing that they're doing with the phone interview is just a quick screening. They're going to ask a few open-ended questions and see, are you the right candidate and should we move you along in the process? And by move you along means there could be multiple interviews within that process, and that's just the first of maybe 2 or 3. So it could lead to a formal interview. So I mentioned earlier before about the panel interview and what are some of the things you can do if you have multiple rooms. Now this kind of looks like a firing squad in this picture. It isn't typically this intimidating, but if it is, again, try to maintain eye contact. Even though you're nervous, practice active listening skills. One of the ways you could do it, and they will not be offended by it, is repeat the question. It gives you a chance to kind of think about your response, and hopefully you start to calm down. And here's a secret. No one quite knew as an interviewer that I was also nervous the first half of the day because I thought people were looking up things on their phones and they were going to play the, can we figure out a question that the interviewer can't answer? So I never wanted to say, oh, I don't know the answer to that question. So, and I'm hoping that I picked the right 4 or 5 candidates that I'm interviewing for a position when I come to campus. So you definitely want to use your responses to help define you as your brand. And if it's possible, remember your interviewer's name, not only because you can address them by name, but you could be putting down notes so that you could follow up. One of the things I said in a presentation just yesterday is that I've hired more people off a targeted thank you note than just the interview. So they did great, but these top 3 candidates all kind of looked the same. And then suddenly this email came through and they not only talked more about their brand, but they demonstrated they were listening by kind of recapturing what we talked about. I thought, this is great. They'll do an amazing job in front of the client. So if you possibly can do that, that's great. And you can also ask for business cards or contact information before you walk out of that room and start skipping and smiling about how amazing you did. So Super Saturday, also not as popular with all majors, but this is where that case style will come in. Again, I'm gonna reflect on the accounting company that I worked for. We would bring in students from all the different schools. We figured it was one big recruiting day. All the decision makers were there. They were able to rotate in different rooms and work on those cases. Sometimes you agree with people you didn't know, and that was intentional because you don't always know the client. So why not put you in a simulation where you had to experience it as well? So you're just participating sometimes in panel interview for the first part of the day. You could have the case competitions for the middle of the day. I know in my situation, they also interviewed me during lunch. So I recommend staying away from like meatballs or things you have to cut because you can't be starving. And you also don't want it to drop on your nice shirt or dress, whatever you're wearing for that day. But one of the most important things I've been hearing a lot of people when they first apply are these AI interviews. So has anyone experienced artificial intelligence interviews? Even for like, I know of someone who applied for a security job. As soon as they clicked submit, a link popped up and said, we would like to learn more about you. So guess what? A lot of companies are doing this because they're getting inundated with so many resumes that they want to make sure it's fair for all people. So government, some larger firms are using HireVue, some other tools to try to get an idea as to who you are. So yes, it is looking at your eye contact, it's listening for your voice inflection to see if possibly you're telling the truth. It's also trying to get some keywords. So that's why I showed you how to look in that job description to make sure you're dropping those little nuggets throughout that session. Not to be scared of it, because we have an amazing tool called Big Interview. We have a handout about it. You can access it through your Handshake account. Once you create your account, you can log in there directly. And why not practice those AI style interviews with our tool? Because it will also give you a score as to how many times you said and ah, and you can look at your body posture and whether or not your voice is showing that you're enthusiastic and excited about that opportunity. So we've been in Zoom world for 3 years now. I think we've all learned how to improve our shot, that moving to a quiet area is important. Our Wi-Fi has to work, no matter how much I know I've upped my Wi-Fi. I think sometimes because it's a shared source of the company I have, my neighbors come home during a certain time. So I turn the Wi-Fi off, all these extra devices I have in my house. I turn off the iPad, I turn off my phone, even the alarm pulls from the Wi-Fi because of the cameras. So you want to make sure you have a strong signal. That's going to be important. And one thing to alert you of, if you have an interview and for some reason you don't have a quiet space in your room or your apartment because you have 3 or 4 roommates, then definitely contact the Career Center. We typically have interview rooms available. if you give us enough notice, and we can probably reserve time so that you have a quiet space for that phone interview or that Zoom. And we have really strong Wi-Fi, so you won't have any concerns with doing that. And you can use it on your actual computer or tablet if you want, because using it on the phone is pretty difficult if you're going to be exchanging documents. So think through that. I'll quickly go into Big Interview because that's one of the tools that I mentioned. You'll have the handout for this, but you'll access it through Handshake. And on the screen here, it's not a live person. We already have the questions recorded for you. You'll see if you do interview roulette under practice. The other tool is underneath the Learn tab that's up in, near the dashboard. They answer questions for you. So when you get that dreaded, tell me about your greatest weakness, and you try to figure out, do I give a hidden strength? Or do I give a true weakness and talk about how I've improved it? I vote for how I've improved it, as long as it's not detrimental to the job. That will definitely help you. And Big Interview will also give you feedback. So that's very helpful. If you're using Power Words, and for COGOT people, you probably remember this because you're using VMOC. That's like a different form of VMOC, but it's listening to your voice and the comments that you're making. If you're using filler words, a lot of us do, but with practice, we start saying as many ums and ahs, and so it takes time. And also pausing is important. Sometimes people treat interviews like a tennis match. You ask a question, I answer. You ask a question, I answer. So breathing and pausing, especially with repeating the question, helps as well. So one additional resource, we've got to leave this with you as well, is that you can use LinkedIn Learning. There's so many tools because sometimes your schedule doesn't align with our schedule as advisors. We want you to have access to that. So part of the handouts you'll have tonight with LinkedIn Learning is how you go to those same subject guides and resources that Katie mentioned to connect your LinkedIn account to it. And then you have access to all these videos. For those of us who've been in for a while, it used to be called lynda.com, which LinkedIn purchased. And so now you have all these great tools. The things I love about these videos is that it can be an hour long, but they're broken down into 5-minute sections. There's subjects, there's also visually some content if you wanted to have tips. So take advantage of that. And then we also have a link to our videos for previous presentations. And Emily's done an amazing job putting them together in different subjects. So you can see like, oh, we covered these things. So for those who are going to, for example, the Marketing Communication Day next Wednesday, that virtual event, you can plan for that. You can be a part of, I understand what my elevator pitch is. We also have a handout for that, which I just forgot to mention, as far as definitely branding yourself each time you walk into a virtual room or a physical room. So if you're interested in an actual mock interview with someone who's part of the Career Center, you can schedule those through Handshake, and we'll definitely have those interviews set up. You can do it as Zoom, you can do it in person. I recommend that you use the style interview that you have planned coming up. So if it's going to be a phone interview, I've literally put people in our interview room and call them on the phone, and we practice. And we say things like, put a postcard up that says smile, because then you can actually have your voice inflection. If you're doing it on Zoom, we practice on looking at the camera because it's for an interview, not a chat with grandma. So we want to make sure we have those type of things that we go through. You also can email the Career Center if you're having challenges accessing Handshake, because every single student, undergrad, graduate, alumni has access to it. If you aren't able to access it, we want to make sure you reach out to us so that we can give you that access. So I want to thank Emily so much for being our tech person, because we couldn't do this without you and setting up the tool for us and actually with the event. And Katie for those amazing resources that I'm going to go back and add to my Canva course. And I also wanted to see if you all have questions. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and Felicia and Katie, there is a question in the chat. So just a reminder, or anyone use the Q&A or the chat to ask questions. So this is in the Q&A, apologies. What if the company does not have a lot of information about them online or a website? How do we research and prepare for the interview to who they are looking for if there's no information about them online? Katie or Felicia? Felicia, you're still off mute, so I'll do you first, and then Katie, you can hop in.
So part of what I always encourage people to do, there's an additional site called Glassdoor, because even if the company hasn't shared information, sometimes people who have worked there have shared it. So Glassdoor will, sometimes people will give that 1 or 2 interview questions they experience. They'll give a review based on job title, what their experience was working there. Sometimes you see some disgruntled employees, so that information is helpful to kind of see what their experience was. But a lot of times it's very positive, gives you insider information. Handshake has an amazing tool as well that you can type in the employer and also see reviews. And you also can see people that have worked there. You can connect with them. So as long as your status is not private within Handshake, which means they're not sharing your address or telephone number, it just means you're sharing your profile. You can connect with people. It says in here, like, to connect with this student or connect with this employer and get more information. So hopefully that's helpful. And I'll also refer to Katie.
Yeah, if you can't find information about the company, which happens sometimes, right? Especially if it's a smaller company or in an industry that doesn't value a web presence. I can't think of one now, but I'm sure they exist. I would try to do some research on the larger industry so that you can go into the interview and say, hey, you know, I know that this is an issue that's facing a lot of different companies in your space. How are you dealing with it? You know, something like that, so that you can be prepared with questions and still have an understanding of, you know, what's going on in the wider industry. If you don't have like that much information about the specific company, you may want to do that. You can also try searching, you know, depending on where the interview is. If you're interviewing here in DC, you could try searching something like the Washington Post for mentions of the company. So like local news, you may want to try that as well.
Thank you both. Any other questions from our attendees? So you can type them in the chat or the Q&A. Nothing is coming in immediately, but we'll give it a few more minutes. I think you two you just did such a great job. There's no questions. Oh, one just came in, so thank you. Another follow-up question. Is there a framework to what we should specifically research for a company, like their mission, values, goals on their website? So what sort of information should someone be looking for to prepare for an interview? And Katie, I'll start with you this time, just to talk about, you know, what you can find on those databases, and then Felicia, if you want to pitch in.
Sure. So on the company website, you will find it tends to be, as you said, more like what they're putting out for the public, right? So their public facing image, and that is very worthwhile. You absolutely want to be looking at that. How are they presenting themselves to the public? And that is probably where you will get stuff like their mission, values, vision, stuff like that. To do sort of background research, to use some of the tools that I mentioned, I think you want to be looking at like a company description. So how are like outsiders talking about the company? How many people work there? You can find information about who you're interviewing with. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes you can. And you know, who their peers are, who their competitors are. Again, just sort of get like a larger view of where they are instead of like what they're presenting to the public. Both are important.
I thought that was a perfect answer. I don't have anything to add to that. That's perfect. Thanks, Katie.
So here's a question for you, Felicia. So what would you say, what are kind of some next steps if you're seeing you're not doing so great during an interview? You answered a question poorly. Do you have any tips for how to recover if you see yourself not doing so well? And then there's a follow-up question after that, but I'll do part one for that, Felicia.
Okay, perfect. So we all have that out-of-body experience that we're thinking we did poorly, and we're probably doing an amazing job, but maybe there's a piece of that question you didn't answer. When they ask the next question, you can answer that question and just say, you know what, I want to circle back to that previous question you were asking me about ABC, because I wanted to add this additional experience I just thought of. And that way you can give them a little bit more clarification as to what that experience has been. So we all get nervous. We all think we're doing a horrible job, but you're probably doing an amazing job, especially if you've practiced and researched. So you can actually go through and do that as well and circle back. Even if it's the last question, they say, well, do you have any questions for me? Well, my first question is, can I go back and give you a little more detail about what I experienced in that difficult circumstance, because I just thought of another piece of it. So you definitely want to save that, because they may be thinking in their mind like, oh, that's the missing piece. Sometimes if an employer is not getting the exact information they're looking for, they'll ask a follow-up question right then and there. So that's not a bad thing, because they want to hear more. They just didn't get quite all the details they wanted initially. So they'll give a follow-up question, and then that's a chance for you to hopefully save yourself during that process as well.
Great, thank you. And kind of going in that same vein, but during the interview, what are some great questions to ask an employer during an interview?
Okay. Well, one of the things I would definitely say is a question that we get all the time when we bring people in that want to come and interview at the Career Center is, what is a typical day? Now, while that is a probably overused question, because there is no typical day, maybe give you some insider information as to what's expected. Maybe you can add more detail to it and say, yeah, I know that as a career advisor, you meet with students from multiple schools. So can you walk me through what a typical day is? You're demonstrating that you've done your research, you've showed interest, and you build a question that's more specific. One of the handouts that you already received in the chat was interview prep. And so those have some typical questions on it to at least get you started, but you don't want to ask those questions of, tell me more about the company. That would not be a good fit to show that you haven't done your research. But you can go into more specific questions because you've done your research on these different tools that Katie mentioned. And you could say, hey, I noticed for this role, you're looking for me to build widgets. You know, who was the person that was in this role before and what made them successful? That shows you care about the evaluation process that you'll have at some point 6 months or 1 year down the road. So really think through questions that you can build on top of the generic ones that you may see in our handouts that makes it a little more specific. 2 or 3 questions is probably enough. You don't want to interview the interviewer, is what we call it. And they may actually cut you off and go, I'm sorry, I have to go to the next person, and all of a sudden you're uncomfortable. So definitely think of that. The most important question to ask before you leave that Zoom or walk out that room is, what are the next steps in the process? I'm very interested in continuing this process, because then you'll know, oh, there's another interview if they forgot to tell you about it, or we're going to be making a decision within 2 weeks and follow up, but then 2 weeks and 3 days you haven't heard anything, so you want to send an email. So definitely ask about what are the next steps in the process.
Thank you, Felicia. And there was a question in the Q&A that I answered, but I'll just quickly recap. Can we do an in-person practice with Career Center advisors if we get an invitation from a specific company? And yes, absolutely. Schedule an appointment with your career advisor through Handshake. And in that appointment booking form, mention that you have a job interview for a specific company. As much information as you can provide to the career advisor ahead of time, including a job posting, just to help them prepare, will make for a great appointment. But they are absolutely available for mock interviews. And that kind of segues into, so I'm very familiar with the Career Center side, but Katie, can you talk to us, how could a student meet with one of their librarians to get help researching companies and using these online tools and databases?
Oh, sure. So I would say I would start with me. And is my contact info in the I don't even know if it's in the slides.
I'll pop it in the chat.
Yeah, we can put in the chat. And then also I'm gonna put a link to my calendar in the slides, and you can make an appointment with me. So I would start with me. It may be that I end up referring you to the librarian with expertise in your specific field, but researching companies and researching industries is kind of my purview. So like, probably no matter what it is, I'll be able to direct you to a good resource. And if not, I can tell you who you want to be in touch with. But I would love to see students who are interested in their career research. That would be great. And I'm going to grab a link to my calendar now.
Thanks, Katie. So it looks like there is another question in the chat. What can we do if the interview lasts longer and interviewers ask more questions than we normally expect? So it just keeps going and going. Felicia, I want to take this one.
Oh, I had that experience too. very recently. So one of the things is that unfortunately, if they're showing a lot of interest and it's going on, as long as you're not getting a parking ticket or you have a conflicting doctor's appointment, hopefully you can kind of endure it. They're definitely showing interest if it's going on a little bit longer, or they want to give you an office tour. That's always a good sign. So I definitely would encourage you to still see the interview out. When they schedule time, definitely ask the person who said, hey, I would love to interview you. Say, how much time should I actually put on my calendar? That way you know. So if they say, oh, expect it to be an hour, then I actually would block 2 hours. And that way I know I have time to do the office tour, or if you just want to meet this other person on the team. So I would definitely do that. But it's always a good sign if it's going longer. You may not feel that way because you wanted the questions to end so you can stop sweating and being nervous. But yeah, you definitely is a good sign.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm going to scroll back through the chat just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think we got them all. So as a reminder, I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow with all the resources that we popped in the chat, including the slide deck from today's presentation. But I want to thank both Felicia and Katie for their time this evening in this fantastic presentation. It was recorded and will be posted to our YouTube page. And our big event in March, our job and internship fair. It'll be a great time for you to meet employers, practice that elevator pitch that Felicia was talking about. It hopefully leads to an interview for a job and internship, and you can feel prepared after having watched this webinar. So that is Wednesday, March 29th in Bender Arena. So thank you again, Katie and Felicia, and thank you all for attending this evening. We hope to see you in the Career Center and at the AU Library soon.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye, all.
everybody.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye, Katie. Bye, Felicia.
Bye.